The first session we're going to kick off with this morning is by Ryan Scherini and Danielle Bechelet. It's a session to provide some important financial information to support families managing their Huntington's prognosis. So managing important topics such as insurance, superannuation, debt management, estate planning, Centrelink, and transition into formal care. This session is aimed to provide people with a baseline of key considerations on how best to navigate complex financial decisions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ryan and Danielle to our stage. Thank you.
Just go back to that. Thanks. Oh, I need a roaming mic because I'm too short to stand behind the lectern. I'll start here anyways, and then we'll find the remote, the mics. Thanks everyone, and for having me, and the online people as well. As Alison said, my name's Ryan Scherini. Thank you. You have to turn up. Okay. I'm from Viridian Advisory, so we're a national financial planning firm, but I've been working with Huntington's members for about the last 5 years, starting when it was the Huntington's WA. And you know, it's really great to see you guys here now in a national organisation, national forum like this. It's just so great to see the growth that your organisation's been on. I'd also like to thank Alison, Kathy, and the executive team for the opportunity to speak to you today, because I think obviously this is a really important topic for me. And every single time I have members call me, they just are thankful for the time that we can spend just giving them some extra information on how to manage their superannuation, insurance issues and questions that they have. I'm only here to talk for about 20 minutes and Danielle will talk for about 10 minutes or so. So I'm not going to be able to go into everything in too much depth. Today's idea is just to really go through high-level concepts on three main principles: superannuation, insurance and Centrelink, and then Danielle's going to talk about estate planning. Hopefully this one's working now. Perfect. So I'm only going to be talking about general information today. So, I don't know anyone's personal circumstances, so please don't take anything today as personal advice. That's basically what all this is saying. Why do I think this matters? Well, the main thing around here is that financial decisions are complex. We often shy away from them because they create a lot of fear and anxiety. Am I making the right decision? Who do I turn to? Who do I trust for this information? So often what we see, and especially Danielle and myself, I see people in their mid-30s, 40s, and they've really done nothing. They haven't got wills, they haven't got super beneficiaries. And especially with people with Huntington's, they're facing, an uncertain future. So what we want to do and what we want to sort of emphasise today is the importance of planning early, getting started now and not waiting till it's too late and putting any stress on yourself, family, carers. As I sort of mentioned, the problem with making money decisions is they're complex. So we often, as I said, shy away from them. We hope that they go away, but they don't, and they often will just continue to compound on us and become bigger and bigger and bigger. So we like to be the people for you guys that can support you, answer these questions. We've always sort of provided myself as a contact, but as I said, we're a national firm. I've got other advisors in other states that can always just be a friendly person just to call up and say, but what do I do in this situation? Okay. The other big thing is that our baseline level of financial literacy, nothing's really ever taught in schools. So for most of us, how we manage money or make financial decisions have largely been shaped most likely by our parents. So if they weren't overly great with managing money, naturally it'll probably come through to yourselves as well. So we like to be that circuit breaker. How do we help you make those decisions for you? If you think about your own situation, so building on that, I just sort of want you to reflect in your own time and sort of say, well, how have I come to make decisions about my finances in the past? How have I decided to buy a house, my mortgages, my estate planning, wills? Do you know all these sorts of information? But also, who would you turn to? Because at the moment, what we're seeing a lot of is AI is starting to come to the front. A lot of people are getting their information from there, but it's not necessarily giving the application of the rules. They might give you the data, the information, but how do you now apply that to your world? and what do you now need to do? So the first main concept I'm going to talk about, and where I'll probably spend quite a bit of time today, is on superannuation. As we sort of know, superannuation's been around now for the best part of 30 years. 1991, around there, was the establishment of superannuation system, but it's now world class, and most recently, the government's just recently indexed the government SG, or your employer contributions, to 12%. And, this has all been designed to basically continue to build higher levels of, less reliance on the age pension system in Australia. So for most people, this will be your second largest asset outside of your family home. And so we think it's a big deal, and that you need to spend a lot more time thinking about how you're going to manage this, starting as an 18-year-old all the way through to 60s, and how you're going to then retire with it. The differences is that when we're dealing and when we're talking with Huntington's members, is that for most, and look, I definitely don't have the best experiences. I only have my relationships that I've had in the past few years, but you may not have a full working career. You may have to stop work in your 40s, or you may have to move to part-time because your prognosis means that that's just what has to happen. And so you don't have the benefit of having a full working life of working career of superannuation. So what's that going to mean for you? And again, with the emphasis on today's talk, it's about starting earlier, and I'll be talking on a few slides about the benefits of compounding interest, and how if you start earlier versus starting in your 30s, it's going to be much better for you, especially if you have to leave work early. Sorry. So the other thing that I want to sort of talk about then is insurances within super. So it's a common question that I get when people do call me up, is that, well, what do I then do? If I've got a Huntington's diagnosis, or it's potentially in my family, what can I do about that? Now, insurance is a bit of a touchy subject in terms of when you have a pre-existing illness. A lot of the insurers are very risk adverse, and they don't like to cover illnesses like that. So, but it's not helpless. We are still able to get insurances, and we can get insurances through our superannuation. So these often come from what we call default arrangements. So if you've ever seen this in your superannuation statement, you might find that you've got some life insurance and total and permanent disability, hopefully even some income protection. These are provided to you automatically, and I will touch a bit more on insurances a little bit later, but more importantly, with your superannuation, it can form a core part of your exit plan. If you need to leave work, if you've got TPD insurance inside your super fund, you can potentially claim on that if you can no longer work, okay? And then once that's claimed upon, that's sitting within your fund, and then you can make decisions around, well, do I now need to access that? Do I pull that out of the superannuation system? Do I pay off my mortgage? Do I use that to pay for my ongoing care and maintenance? There are some certain rules in place around here. So when you get insurance through super, you can have multiple superannuation funds, and some people will often come to me and say, well, should I roll all these over? Should I consolidate them all? When you're dealing with a condition like Huntington's, there's pros and cons, like every decision, but if you were to roll over all your superannuation funds, then you can lose some of that existing insurance cover, okay? So often what I'll talk to members about is saying, okay, well, actually you might want to retain what you've got there, because it's going to be very difficult for you to get cover elsewhere, okay? But there may also be options around transferring cover to, if you do want to consolidate things around. So the best thing to do is ask for some advice and get your personal situation on a plan for us. When it comes to accessibility, so superannuation, there's a lot of rules. Even for myself, I've been doing this for 15 years now, and there's still always rules changes. So I don't expect everyone to understand everything that's going on here, but I'll focus on the 4 key ones. So from my conversations, total and permanent disability is the primary one that most people can claim upon. Okay, so if your Huntington's has got to the point where you can no longer work, we can claim for the insurances, as I mentioned. The insurer and the super fund are generally 2 different entities. So you apply for the insurance first, they pay out into the super fund, and then you actually need to apply to the super fund trustee to say, hey, I'm also TPD'd, and I need to have access to my money, okay? The thing is that if you're under the age of 60 and you access your superannuation under a TPD, there can potentially be some tax consequences. So again, talking to someone like myself, we can work out, well, why do you need the money? How do you need it? Do you need it as a pension? Do you need it as a lump sum? Because these are all going to play into the decisions that we make moving forward. The second one, life insurance or life death benefits. So these are obviously an option once someone has passed away, but a lot of people also aren't aware that all super funds allow what's called a terminal illness benefit. So it's essentially like an advanced life benefit. So if you are diagnosed to the point where a doctor is satisfied that you may likely pass away in the next 2 years, you can actually also apply to your super fund and have the release of funds paid into you as well. So that may give you a bit more flexibility in those final years to sort of do what you need to do, take that pressure and stress off your family, but also around like estate planning things. There may be issues of tax to dependents later on. Pulling money out before that event happens can be advantageous to your family. The third type is retirement. So the most common time superannuation is used for people is retirement, so over age 60. So you can actually access superannuation from 60, not 67. Another common question I get, because they get confused with the age pension, which is eligibility of 67. But yeah, superannuation is 60, okay? And the main thing you need to meet for that condition is that you're either permanently retired, so you can now disclose to the tax office, say, I'm never going to work again. But also another little loophole is just leaving employment. So let's say at 60 you decide, I'm done, but I might also just work part-time for Bunnings on the side. Leaving that initial employment actually meets one of the conditions and you can access all your super. If you are getting to that point, the benefits of superannuation after age 60 is it's all tax-free. So that's why we have this system in Australia, and if you understand the rules and how to work them in your favour, it can be a great scheme for you. The last one that sometimes comes up is the compassionate or financial hardship rules that currently sit in place. These are for people who may not necessarily yet meet the TPD condition, but they may need, for example, $10,000, $15,000 for medical treatment or something like that. It is all managed through the ATO, so you can call your super fund, but they'll probably direct you to the ATO and you do your applications through there. I do sort of say to clients that it's a time-consuming process, and often you can only make one claim a year, so you need to be really careful about what you're claiming for. And you also can't be reimbursed. So if you've already taken the cost of, say, a treatment, you can't use this to then pay you back. So if it's $10,000, well, the ATO is going to say, sorry, tough luck. You need the invoices from the potential treatment that you need, and then that's what they'll release to you. The next thing around beneficiaries. So a lot of people that I speak to aren't aware that superannuation, as a general rule of thumb, doesn't go to your will or your estate. The trustee of the super fund ultimately is the one that makes that decision, and they'll generally be guided by if you have a beneficiary nomination on your fund. Beneficiaries range, but the general rule of thumb is it's normally a spouse, a child, or a financial or interdependent relationship, such as a carer. Okay, the common mistakes that I see here are people nominating their parents or siblings as beneficiaries, and legally they're not actually allowed to be unless they meet the financial or interdependent rules. Okay, so again, getting some advice around that, but also looking at your own situation and saying, okay, well, what do I need here? Do I need and looking at what my super fund provides me, because some will offer you what's called a binding nomination, which means the trustee is bound to pay it to the person, so long as it's a legal nomination. Importantly, the trustee doesn't look up front. They will only look at the time of death. So if you say, I want my brother to be my binding nomination, it'll probably sit on your fund, but when the time comes, they'll say, sorry, this isn't a valid nomination, and it'll fail, okay? But there's a lot more super funds nowadays bringing out what's called non-lapsing nominations, and some of these can be also binding, okay? So when I talk to, again, people with Huntington's, I'm sort of saying, well, look, the likely prognosis is that you're going to lose capacity, you may not be able to sign your signature anymore, maybe start to consider non-lapsing nominations where you don't need to then worry about who's going to be the nomination in the future. And lastly, I have sort of touched on tax already. The main thing around superannuation that I just wanted to focus on is the great benefits that the government is giving. So when money goes into superannuation, it's only taxed at 15%, when you pull it out, assuming it's over the age of 60, it's tax-free. So when you contrast this to if I choose to invest money in my own name, if you're lucky enough to be on the highest marginal tax rate, you'll be paying 47% tax on all your earnings versus superannuation's at 15. So again, if you are in a situation where you may potentially end up leaving work earlier due to Huntington's, maybe using superannuation to your own advantage is advantageous with your planning. What I'm showing you here is the benefits of starting early. So this is basically someone who, let's take it, they're 18. They invest $2,000 every month for 30 years. I've used a rate of return of 8.5%, and a lot of people do say, well, look, Ryan, is that realistic? Is 8.5% doable, especially in the current market with Trump doing what he's doing and things like that? Well, we don't, as advisors, we don't tend to look at 6, 12-month type returns. We look at 10-year type returns, and this is a very common rate of return for most super funds in Australia. Okay. What we can sort of see here is this person, and this is the benefit of compounding interest. So it doesn't sort of look too flash at the front end. First 10 years is pretty quiet, but you can really see how it ramps up towards the back end. So after 30 years, so if you think this person's now nearly 50, okay, they've now got $3.3 million sitting there, and you think, okay, well, what does that cost me? How can I afford $2,000 a month? Well, part of that might be your employer contributions already. So this might just be you topping yourself up a little bit more, okay? But again, the benefits of starting earlier versus this one here is the person who maybe attends this conference and you're in your mid-30s, you think, okay, I'm going to get started on that. They've organically got $80,000 in their super fund already, so that's the initial deposit, and then they start putting in the $2,000 a month. Well, when they get to the same age at nearly 50, they've got $1 million in there. Still a great number, but really trying to emphasise the benefits of if we get started earlier, and if you've got children yourself that you think, okay, well, they're 18, 19, 20, well, these are the conversations, like I said, around financial literacy you should be having with them as well. The second topic I was going to talk about is insurances. So as a baseline, these are your 4 types of insurance we have in Australia. The reason why I do it like this is that life insurance is pretty self-explanatory. Most people do understand what it does, apart from the extra piece I mentioned earlier around terminal illness. It can pay an advance benefit, okay? Then we have total and permanent disability. Often in our industry, it's an acronym, TPD is what you'll see, especially in your super fund statements. It's also a lump sum benefit, and so the big thing here is that you have to be suffering a disability, and 2 doctors have to say that you can never work again in any occupation, and they will look at your education, training and experience. So they're not going to say, okay, well, you were a lawyer in your professional year and we're going to make you go be a janitor, okay? But what they will be looking at and saying, well, do you have other transferable skills that can move to one of the other jobs, okay? And TPD is definitely getting a big overhaul at the moment at claim time. A lot of insurers are taking a lot more time now to work out what else what else people can do. Income protection. So often, again, people will have this automatically through their super fund. Sometimes it's also got a transferable name called salary continuance. It all means the same thing. It's a replacement of income. So it replaces up to 70 to 75% of your income, depending on your policy, and it pays it as a monthly benefit, okay? There are 2 predetermined rules on a policy called a waiting period and a benefit period. A waiting period is looking at how long you need to be off work before you can put in the claim. So you'll often see 30, 60, 90 days, sometimes as long as 2-year waiting periods. And then you'll have a benefit period. Well, that's looking at how long the benefit will continue to pay you for. And commonly in a super fund, you'll see 2 years, but you can get 5 years, and you can sometimes even get to age 65 benefit period, which means that policy would continue to pay you to your 65th birthday. Trauma cover is something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about, and it's because you can't get it through super funds. Most of the time you'll get this directly through, say, an advisor. Trauma insurance covers you for critical conditions like like stroke, heart attack, cancer. It does cover neurological conditions. Huntington's, unfortunately, isn't one of the ones on the list because most of the time with this, it has to be underwritten, and a Huntington's condition will be brought up in underwriting, and the insurer will most likely decline an application, okay? So unless you don't have as I said, unless you don't have the condition running in your family or you have no pre-existing conditions, then you can look at this sort of cover. Now, as an advisor, we do sort of suggest these all blend into one, and I do get the question often, well, Ryan, if I've got 3 or 4 super funds and I've got life insurance under all of them, can I claim on them all? So yes, to a point. Life insurance, TPD, you can claim on multiple policies. So there is a common myth out there that I can only claim on one at a time. So yeah, absolutely, claim on all of them. Income protection, if you have, say, 3 policies, 2,000, 2,000 and 2,000 a month, you can claim on all 3 of them, so long as the total benefit doesn't exceed that 70 to 75% of your salary, okay? So you just got to really review what you've got in your super funds and then take it from there. The last one I'm going to talk about is Centrelink. As I said, for my time today, I haven't gone into too much detail on this. I haven't put means testing tables up here. I really just want to talk about the high-level payments that are available to people. And I've put them in order here of how I think people would first claim upon them. So we're starting off with the job seeker, which is essentially the unemployment benefit. But if you have a medical condition and a doctor signs off on it, you can get a medical exemption for the job seeker, so you don't actually need to be looking for work. The benefit of the job seeker is that it doesn't have the same medical requirements, the loopholes that you need to jump through to get onto it. And often if you're submitting a disability pension, Centrelink will give you the option to actually do both at the same time, because the job seeker will be approved sooner, and then when the disability is being looked at later, they'll move you from one to the next. As I mentioned, there are some means testing, and so some of the downsides to the job seeker is there's a hard asset threshold. If you have more than those assets, you get nothing. So it's either you get it or you don't. And that's why a lot of people, we want to try and transition them onto the second one, the disability support pension, because like the age pension, that has from the asset test point of view, that has a scale. So you have your minimum threshold, but you have a maximum threshold as well. If you fall between there, you can still get a part payment. The disability support pension, as I mentioned, has a few more loopholes to jump through, a few more doctor's reports that are required. But again, for most people who have a Huntington's diagnosis, by the time you're getting to the point that you're having to leave work, this will most likely be a foregone conclusion that doctors are going to sign off on this. The third one here is the carers payment. So the carers payment is available for those people who are looking after someone with a lifelong disability. So often this will come up where a spouse is needing to care now for their partner with Huntington's, and there's a big decision that has to be often be made as well. Is the spouse going to stay in work, or are they going to go into more formal care for them? So this is available to people, and it works very similarly to the disability support pension. There's an asset test, there's an income test, and you go through the motions. Now, there are some quirky rules. If you're under the age of 67, any money that you hold in superannuation is not assessed for these tests. So if you have moved your money to a pension fund at that point, it is assessed, okay? So one of the things that we will work through with clients for advice is just looking at, well, where's the best place for them to hold their money? And as I mentioned earlier in my slides, that if you actually pulled the money out of the superannuation system, then you may actually impact these types of tests for yourself, okay? The fourth one is the carers allowance. It's a lower payment, so it's only an allowance. It's about $163, I think, a fortnight at the moment. And but the benefit of the carers allowance is it works really well in early phase, diagnosis where you're needing a bit of support, but it's not full-time care yet. The benefit is there's no asset test, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. It only has an income test, and so long as the household income is under $250,000, you could be eligible for this. So I live my life saying it's better to ask the question. What's the worst that you'll find out is a no, but you better put your application in, because if you don't, you won't get anything anyways. Okay. The last one, which will be I've popped up here because Centrelink control these as well, is a concept called special disability trusts. So as I said, Centrelink are, I suppose, the gatekeeper here. They are the ones that are going to say whether you do or you don't qualify for this world. But if you do qualify, they are a great way to manage assets, but they're also a great way to manage ongoing Centrelink benefits. A special disability trust allows you to, or allows a family member to contribute up to $500,000 into this trust. And the beauty of that is that doesn't come into the gifting rules. So again, I appreciate there's a bit of technical knowledge going on here, but if a person was normally to gift money to another person, Centrelink will look at that poorly and say, well, you've deprived yourself of that asset. Okay, so these have special carve-outs in the legislation that may allow you to make that gift to a spouse or to a child or to someone else who may be needing these funds. The other second benefit to these special disability trusts is that for the person themselves with that disability, it's also an exempt asset. So similar to the house, their family home, this special disability trust up to a limit is not going to be counted for their assets, for their own Centrelink. So they may now be able to obtain things like the disability support pension. So it's probably a good timing because I'm about to hand over to Danielle as well, but something like a special disability trust is often done through your will. So you need to have advanced planning and thinking about, well, what do you want to do here? And speak to a lawyer about, and make sure they have the qualifications, because this is a very unique piece of law. So you want to make sure they really understand what they're doing and how it's going to benefit you and your family. Thank you, that's my time. I'll hand over to Danielle.
Lovely, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alison. Thank you all for having me here today. So the focus on my short presentation today will be planning early. Okay, so it's really important for people with a progressive illness such as Huntington's to plan early, because as a lawyer, we have to be satisfied that the client has capacity to make decisions at the time they sign their documents and at the time that they're giving instructions to us, okay? So I'm just briefly going to cover off on a few things here. I note that somebody else is speaking on advanced health directives a bit later on, so I'll breeze over that a little bit, but I'll talk about the others in a little bit more detail. So in terms of planning for passing away, Ryan's covered that you need to have your superannuation nominations in place, which is really, really important. But for all of your personal assets, a will is the way to go. Okay, so things like obviously passing on your home, bank accounts, vehicles to your spouse and to your children, you would put a will in place. Now, planning early allows you to give consideration to what you need to do in your will. So a really important part of the will is who is going to manage everything after you're gone. That person is called an executor. Okay, so my recommendation is always to future-proof these documents as much as possible. So you want to have a few tiers to cover eventualities. So a classic example might be you would put your spouse as first executor, as long as they're happy to do so, and then you would have a backup provision for if your spouse was no longer there. For certain clients, we might have 3 tiers. It just gives them a bit of longevity with the documents, and that means if your spouse passes away or is incapable of doing the role, you already have a backup in the document, and you might not have to update it right away. And that can be important for people with a progressive illness where their capacity can fluctuate over time. So we want to make sure that they have quite a few different circumstances covered in their will, so that if they are unable to change it in future, that's not going to be a problem for them, because they have already covered, if my spouse isn't there, I want my children to be the executor, and I want these provisions in my will to apply. The other factor, of course, for wills, especially for people who have young children, is who will care for them in the event you pass away before they reach the age of 18. So that can be, again, really, really important for people to plan early. You want someone that you trust to manage the money for your children and also to manage the day-to-day care for your children. The other factors for wills that are really, really important to consider is it must be validly signed and witnessed. So having a lawyer prepare your will can not only ensure that you get advice that suits your circumstances. So with a will, you get a will, and you also get advice that goes alongside it. The lawyer will also make sure that it's signed properly. And if appropriate, the lawyer will also make sure that an assessment of capacity is undertaken if required. So obviously, the general rule of thumb is people are presumed to have capacity unless there's some reason otherwise. For people with obviously any sort of progressive illness, as lawyers, there is a legal test that we're required to conduct to ensure that they have the capability to make a will. This comes from a very old case called Banks and Goodfellow. And the general rule of thumb is the person needs to know what a will is. They need to understand their financial circumstances to a certain degree. Now, they don't have to know the ins and outs, okay? Some couples may have one person mainly manages the finances, the other person comes along for the ride. That's fine, as long as they have an overview, look, I own a home, I own bank accounts, they have a rough idea, that is okay too. They don't have to know exactly how much they have in each bank account, for example. And I think that's really important for people with progressive illnesses to know that capacity is a test that is conducted at a specific point in time, and just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you can't do any of these sorts of documents, okay? There is a legal test, and then there is a medical test that may apply, but if people come early enough, we often find we don't even really need to worry because they're very good still. They haven't had any sort of issues where their memory has started to decline. So planning as early as possible, especially if you have a diagnosis, is really, really important. The other one that's really important for people to be aware of is an enduring power of attorney. So that is where you can plan for someone to help you with your financial affairs now and in the event you lose capacity in future. So a lot of people ask, well, what's the difference between an enduring power of attorney and a power of attorney? The enduring power of attorney continues in force in the event you lose capacity in future, whereas a power of attorney would generally just be for a particular transaction and it would end after that. Now, an important thing, given this is a national conference, and I know we've got a few people online who may be from other states, and some of you here may have travelled to come to this conference, is that wills and estates law is generally state-specific, okay? So each state has different legislation that applies, which means it's important to see a lawyer in your state to get not only the correct advice, but also the correctly drawn power of attorney and power of guardianship. There's a lot of movement in Australia. People move interstate. So if you've had your documents done in Queensland, for example, and you're moving to Victoria, that's probably a good time to review your planning and just check if everything looks okay, check if it can be recognised in the other state, or if you're still capable of doing so, it may just be easier to do a new document in your new state. So the power of attorney, really important for financial decisions, allowing someone else to assist you with those, things like selling your property if it became necessary for your care, dealing with your bank account, paying your bills, claiming any of the different pensions and superannuation benefits that Ryan's covered today as well. The power of attorney is able to engage a financial advisor on your behalf and make sure those things are dealt with. The next one is an enduring power of guardianship. So this one is for medical and lifestyle decisions. Now, just a caveat here is that obviously these are the way the documents are named where I'm from, which is Western Australia. They might have slightly different wording and slightly different forms in other states. Often they can be combined together, so you might make one document which has the power of attorney and guardianship together. But the guardianship is very similar to the power of attorney. It's you giving power to somebody else, but for medical and lifestyle decisions. So a lifestyle decision is where you live, who you see, and what you do. So this is a delegation of power to somebody else for those functions. It only comes into effect when you're incapable of making those decisions yourself. And with these two documents, the power of attorney and power of guardianship, you can have some longevity provisions made in there, like I was talking about with your will. So you can have a first port of call as your attorney and guardian, and you can have a backup provision as well. So if your spouse is not available or is no longer capable, or if one of your children says, look, I can't do it anymore, there will be a backup person who can step in certain circumstances. Depending on where you live, depends on whether the power of attorney needs to be registered with a particular organisation. With the power of guardianship, the recommendation is, of course, you can upload it to My Health Record. You can make sure your doctor or any specialist you see has a copy of it so they know who is your guardian in the event they get to the point where they think we need to speak to the guardian now. The Advanced Health Directive, if you think of this as you pre-planning medical treatment decisions, so power of guardianship is delegation to somebody else to make those decisions for you. The Advanced Health Directive allows you to make those decisions now in a legal document. And obviously, there's a medical side and a legal side to that document. You don't have to, but you can get medical advice about the document and you can get legal advice about the document. But the form is generally made so that you can try and fill it out as much yourself as possible, because they want people to consider these sorts of things if it's something that they want to do, and not to have the barrier of going to get advice. Ryan already covered superannuation nominations, but I guess one of the things that I can cover from my perspective is, again, this needs to be done early enough. If you're not capable of signing the paperwork, most binding nominations require you to sign it in front of 2 witnesses for it to be valid and binding. Some funds have different rules, but that's the general rule of thumb, is you have to sign a document in front of 2 witnesses for it to be a binding nomination. So Ryan and I are both here today with tables out the front. If you have any questions that you don't want to ask now, you're more than welcome to come and see us. I have some information that you can take away on the power of attorney and the power of guardianship that I hope will be helpful. But if you do have any questions now, feel free to ask. No questions? Okay. I think we're probably at time anyway, Alison. But hopefully we get a chance to speak to you later on. And for anyone online, Ryan and I are both happy for you to obviously contact us. Our information is available. We'd both be happy to answer a question if you want to give us a call over the next couple of days.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. I think questions probably are quite personal. And people probably don't want to say those in an audience situation. So both Ryan and Danielle will be available during lunch break, during afternoon tea break, and during our canapé event. For anybody who is listening in or chiming in online, we will make sure that we have those details available so that we can have some contact with both Ryan and Danielle. And thank you for your time today.